What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel. And if you guys are new, welcome. Welcome. Today we're taking it to the Solar Hunter, utilizing some of those artifact mods from this season and that new armor mod system as well, making this an upgraded infinite ignitions build utilizing the Caliban hand exotic gauntlets as well. So this build, very fun for that PvE realm. So starting out right here for our abilities, aspects, and fragments, we're going with Blade Barrage. In my opinion, definitely better than both of your golden gun options for the PvE realm, unless you're using Celestial. But even at that point, I feel like Blade Barrage is very close to Celestial Nighthawk plus golden, so definitely going with this bad boy right here. Now for our abilities, we're going with Gambler's Dodge, so we can keep up our knives infinitely by dodging next to enemies, which recharges that melee ability. Now you can go with whatever jump you want, but I personally go with triple jump always in PvE, just as the best in my personal opinion. Now obviously for this build, we're going with proximity explosive knives just because of that pairing with Caliban's hand, making them a little bit better in their scorch and ignition aspect, as well as we get a faster regen because of those exotic arms. Now we are going to be using Firebolt grenades, which utilize our artifact mods from this season, giving us those double firebolts, plus we can create some fire sprites with these, which come in handy with this build. Now for the first aspect that we're going to be using, knock 'em down right here, your solar supers are enhanced. So for us in Blade Barrage, it launches more projectiles. But more importantly, the second part of this aspect down here, while radiant, final blows with your equipped throwing knife fully refund that energy. So we are going to become radiant with this build and then get those knife defeats with those enhanced proximity knives and get it back instantly. So very important for this build, spreading that scorch and making this that infinite ignitions. Now for our second aspect, we're going to be using On Your Mark for its 3 fragment slots, plus that precision final blows grant you and nearby allies increased weapon handling and reload speed. When we dodge, it maximizes those stacks straight up to 3, so this helps in that PvE realm, specifically with that reload speed, being able to keep up damage more consistently. Now when we move on to our fragments right here, I kind of played around with a couple of them, and this is what I ended up on. So first off, we have Ember of Blistering. Defeating targets with those solar ignitions grant grenade energy, so this helps us get back those fire sprites and those firebolt grenades a little bit faster, and we have that with our weapons as well. Next off, we have Ember of Charge. So those ignitions that we're getting from our knives and all of that scorch spread additional scorch to the effective targets, and we're using that scorch in a few different ways as well. As you can see right here, when we are picking up those fire sprites, it grants us restoration, and when we revive allies, we also get restoration. So this is where it comes in very handy in that end game build for those Nightfalls, legendary battlegrounds, whatever you may be going through. Mercy is a very good fragment that we got this season. Now right here, defeating those scorched targets like I talked about before grants us melee energy and creates fire sprites. So another way for us to create fire sprites, plus in some of that end game activity, you're not going to get that one throwing knife defeat like in some of the lesser content in the game. So by defeating those scorched enemies, it gives us it back. Plus with that Gambler's Dodge, we're going to be able to have them up very, very consistently. But as you go deeper in, like GMs, it's a little harder to get that aspect to proc and get that full recharge on defeats, but you are still spreading an additional scorch because of our Caliban hands. Now, last but certainly not least, this one is super important for this build as well. So we are basically always radiant because of that throwing knife, which always procs this as well and knock them down, and we get that full refund on those defeats. So make sure to have Ember of Torches on for this build. Now for weapons right here, we are going with something that hasn't been pulled out of my vault in a second, but have been liking it a lot for those anti-unstoppable champions. We're going with the Bastion Kinetic Fusion Rifle right here. So it fires that spread of 3 slugs and it stuns unstoppable champions for us. Plus our ignitions also can stun unstoppable champions. Now for my next weapon, I'm going with the BXR Battler with Demolitionist and Incandescent, another way for us to spread that Scorch, plus it is a solar weapon for some of our armor mods, and that Demolitionist, when we get the defeats with this pulse rifle, we're getting back those fire bolts even faster, allowing us to spread that Scorch, fire sprites, get back our melee, and get that restoration. Now you could, depending on the content, throw on something like Callus Mini Tool, which also has Incandescent. I'm using this for barrier champions, plus I just really like this weapon, and Callus Mini Tool could be a substitute for those overload champions. Now last but not least, we are using fixed odds right here with Feeding Frenzy Incandescent, another solar weapon for those armor mods, plus Incandescent spreading that Scorch for us, applying some of our fragments that we had on to get back our melee, create those fire sprites, etc. Now, when we move on to our artifact right here, we're using that anti-barrier pulse as well as overload SMG, depending on what you bring in between your Callus Mini Tool and, for me, my BXR Battler. But more importantly, right here, we have authorized mods for grenades, making it a little bit cheaper for us to use those grenade mods, as you'll see in a second. Next off right here, Solar Surge, we're using those fire sprites besides giving us restoration, which is a very, very good way to get our health back in that end game content and keep us alive. We are collecting it to give us armor charge, which we're using, you can see in a second, for surging weapons for Solar. Now we also have these two very important mods for our firebolt grenades. We're going to have flare up, so our grenades stack more scorches on those enemies. Damaging combatants with a fire grenade also spawns those fire sprites, so another way again for us to get even more of those fire sprites for that nice restoration and endgame synergy. And last, we have that rain of firebolts, allowing us to have that second charge of firebolts, just bringing that synergy to the max. Now, when we move on to our armor pieces and stats, we're going with resilience and discipline, as well as strength for what I'm focusing on. Now, right here, we're going to have that special ammo finder, so we can keep our bastion up for those anti-unstoppable champions. Now, next off, we're going to get hands-on and solar siphon. So hands-on, we're going to get super energy on those melee defeats with those proximity knives, and solar siphon, both our fixed odds as well as our BXR or Callus Mini Tool, whatever you're using, is going to create orbs of power for us. Now, the reason that this build is so good is these Caliban hands right here with these improved proximity knives and faster regen. So your proximity knives scorch targets it damages with explosions and ignites targets on final blows, making them better than just having that explosion like they did before. After throwing your proximity knife, you gain increased regeneration until the knife explodes. So if nobody walks by the knife and it doesn't explode, you get a nice bigger chunk than normal, plus you get this roastum right here. When it does explode, you get that regen rate that's a little bit faster. Now for our mods, we're going to be using Focusing Strike, so grant ourselves class ability energy when we damage enemies with that melee attack and our proximity knives. Now we're going to be creating orbs of power via firepower as well as heavy-handed, so we can get those orbs of power on grenade defeats as well as our powered melee defeats. So there's orbs of power and fire sprites everywhere with this build. Now next up right here, we're going to be using Charged Up to increase that stacks of armor charge, which we're getting with those orbs of power, plus fire sprites. Now we're going to be using Solar Reserves as well for our fixed odds, so that thing doesn't really run out of ammo. With that, it is very nice for that end game and spreading Scorch, and then Solar Resistant just as that synergy to pair with our Solar subclass. Now onto our boots, where we are using that solar weapon surge, which I talked about earlier, which gives our BXR Battler as well as our fixed odds some extra damage with that armor charge. And like I said, we're getting that with our fire sprites as well as orbs of power. So this helps with that endgame content again, dealing with some of those stronger enemies because they are doing more damage. And then on top of that, we're also going to have Invigoration, reduce melee cooldown each time we pick up orbs of power. I figured this was important as well. Like I said, the higher end game content you go, you need something to give back your melee a little bit quicker on top of just the dodge and the explosions with Radiant. So this helps a lot because, like I said, orbs of power are flowing with this build. And last but certainly not least, we have Time Dilation, which allows that weapon surge to last longer with the armor charge. We also have Reaper, so when we do dodge, our next weapon final blow is going to give us an orb of power, so continuing that trend of orbs everywhere. And finally, Bomber, reduce our grenade cooldown when we use our class ability, so we can have those fire grenades and fire bolts up all the time for those additional fire sprites, giving us that restoration when we pick up those fire sprites, allowing us to spread additional scorch everywhere so we can get our melee back even faster and have that radiant up for us and our fellow allies. So this build, very, very fun to use. The upgraded version of the Caliban's hands from when they first came out, the ignitions especially, with solar being popular this season alongside Strand and Void. This build is definitely up there in that A and S tier for your hunter. So hopefully y'all can try this build out, give it a shot in some of that end game content. Even in the lighter content, it is way good for that, but it works very good in the end game as well. So thank you guys so much for watching and that support. Truly appreciate it. Hopefully y'all like these builds. If you do, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe, like button, that bell to come back. We got plenty more coming at you soon here with those weapon guides as well. So thank y'all again for that support. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.